Hi friends, good afternoon to all of you. I am Anushua. On behalf of Observer Research Foundation, I welcome you all to our special panel discussion on appearance of the invisible migrant workers during COVID-19 in India. I will be the moderator for this session for the next 1 hour. And we know that certain issues, facets will come up, which will be sensitive in its nature. And our main intention is to organize a free, frank, and scholarly discussion on this burning and sensitive topic on migrant workers. Well, we all know that the outbreak of the pandemic and the prolonged lockdown declared by the central government has brought out a large section of vulnerable people to the forefront in our society's gauge. And they are millions of migrant workers working in different unorganized segments of economies in all over our country. And in most of the time, they are remained at the margins and silently contributing to our economy as cheap labor. This kind of sudden announcement of complete lockdown all over the country, it caused tremendous a setback on them. And, it immediately, it caused for joblessness as immediate shutdown of different markets, different factories, construction sites, and also food delivery systems. They were being closed after, apart from a few necessary services. So in this situation, their marginalization, their vulnerability, it increased manifold in numbers. And the rest is history. We saw how these people were fleeing en masse on roads from Maharashtra, from Delhi, from Karnataka, from Madhya Pradesh, Kerala, to reach their native places, native homes. And in this situation, frankly speaking, they were not really bothered about the imposition of rules by the government. Neither they were frightened by the implications of the outbreak of corona virus. But what actually forced them to flee from their shelters was sheer fear of starvation. And after the hue and cry from public domain and also the significant intervention of Supreme Court, the government, both at center as well as states, to take care of these hapless populace. But frankly speaking, the nature of their suffering and pain and the amount were far from over. So in this context, we wonder how the right to dignified life as guaranteed by our constitution means to this a section of people. Do we really need to relook the notion of governance, welfare, and development, keeping the rights of these people in mind? And what would be the policy implications for a longer period of time, not really concentrated on these specific situation of pandemic? So we know that these are critical and sensitive issues, and I'm sure all of us, we have agreed to disagree on all these points. And to discuss these critical issues, we have with us three distinguished panelists. Mr. Mr. Vaijayant Panda, National Vice President and Spokesperson of Bharatiya Janata Party, Professor Manish K. Jha from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, and Mr. Shubir Bhomik, a veteran BBC correspondent and presently editorial director, The Eastern Link. Before we start, we will request all our distinguished guests to confine within 10 minutes maximum in the first round, so that we can keep a little space for taking question and answers. And I'll try my best to get back to you again for your short intervention in the second round. So let's start with our today's discussion. And I'm sure all of you will be getting loads of questions. So let me start with Mr. Panda. You know, as a researcher, I'm very much intrigued to raise this issue that the critics have argued that you know, this undesirable situation could have been avoided if these people were given some more time before you know, announcement of complete lockdown. So we want to have your views on that. This is number one. And second, we all know how commendable relief work you are carrying on, and you are doing for the migrant workers. Among the migrant laborers in Odisha, those who work in different parts of India. So we would like to know from your personal experiences, what kind of difficulties, what kind of challenges you are facing in doing this work. And thirdly, we want to have your perception regarding you know, long-term policy formulation, keeping the rights of you know, right to good health and also economic opportunities of these people in mind, as we all know that we are going through the third stage of lockdown, and both the governments have taken initiative for the returning of these people to their native places. So these three main questions I would like to raise for you, and next 10 minutes for you, Mr. Panda.
Let me start by saying that for all my political career, I have been involved with the issues of migrant labor, because from my home state, Odisha, there are many millions of out migrants throughout the country and also abroad. And I've been involved in their issues. They're working as bonded labor in brick kilns and in factories in the rest of the country. So during this time, it's no different. I have been in touch with many thousands of them, and I've had the privilege of coordinating through either government authorities or NGOs or through my party colleagues, aid to about 6,000 of them in 15 different states. Now let's put things in context. This crisis is not just an Indian crisis. It's an unprecedented crisis. At least in living memory, none of us have seen anything like this. And it's throughout the world. And as you can see, most parts of the world have been grappling with exactly the same issues when it comes to unemployment, economic problems. But in controlling the pandemic itself, India has done remarkably well. It is getting compliments from public health experts from around the world because of the difficult decisions that have been taken. You know, this is not a country like China where you can just lay down the rule and enforce. You have to goad people into it. And from the top, from the Prime Minister onwards, including many state chief ministers, that has been done. And by and large, the vast majority of Indians have complied. I think this is remarkable in itself. Sometimes the focus becomes on small groups of people who may not have complied, but the vast majority of Indians have complied. And this is why we have actually done well. If you look at ICMR projections 2 months ago, the projections were that our situation would be devastatingly worse compared to where we are today. And to just give one more comment on the management of the pandemic itself, we have been ahead of the curve in terms of having dedicated COVID beds, dedicated ventilators. We were behind on PPE kits because India didn't used to manufacture them and to get test kits, but we have been catching up on that. Now, the next issue is the crisis, economic crisis. And this economic crisis hits across the spectrum. It hits all sectors. But of course, the topic for our discussion today is where it hits hardest. because migrant laborers have been hit the hardest. We have the largest section of migrant laborers. Now, the government has actually come out with a series of measures. And this is where what you talked about, the change of governance methods, has already kicked in, because over the past many years, the JAM trilogy, the Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, Mobile, has been making a big difference in terms of cutting out the leakage in the system and getting benefits directly to people. And we have seen that happen during this crisis. You are probably all aware of what has been done, but just to, there are literally a dozen things I can read out. But I'd just like to point out 35,000 crores has gone out in the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan package to about 390 million beneficiaries. There have been other aspects of it. 21 million building and construction workers have received 1,500 rupees each. This is precisely the segment we are talking about, the migrant workers, because the building and construction workers are almost all migrants. Similarly, there have been direct transfer to women. About 205 million women beneficiaries have received 500 rupees each. This is also connected to the migrants' issues, because the migrants on a regular basis send money back home. And when they are not working and they're not able to have that funds transfer every month, it affects people at home. It affects their families, their parents. So there's 205 million women, similarly 80 million farmers, and I can go on and on. But these are all just to manage the immediate crisis. The way forward, we have to think about 2 or 3 things. Now, in terms of the migrants, you mentioned being on the roads and coming back. Do keep in mind that the vast majority of migrants had not done that actually. Again, we sometimes tend to focus on an aspect that gets a lot of publicity. Yes, many thousands of migrants did actually go out on the roads, but they represent a small fraction of the many tens of millions of migrants who did not. I know this because I'm constantly in touch. We have been working, my colleagues and I have been working 12 hours a day on the phone, coordinating relief and other such materials. And let me tell you something, throughout the country, with maybe a couple of exceptions, in almost every state, irrespective of who the government is, the district administrations and the state administrations have been very responsive, with just a couple of exceptions. And despite that, my party colleagues have been working. We have a program to feed the needy, and about 15 million people have been fed. I'm sorry, about 15 crores people have been fed through the Feed the Needy program. These are those who got left out on the fringes somehow in the initial days, where the local PDS was not up and running very quickly to give food to those who did not have ration cards, etc. But I can tell you, in the recent days, in the last, say, 10 days or so, almost everywhere, the district administrations have become very good at reaching the last mile, the last person. Now, you saw panic created in a few states. I don't want to go into which states, because it's not about politics. It's about a few places where migrant workers did not have the confidence that they could continue. It was not about starvation really, because nobody was starving. Food was being provided either by district administration or by NGOs or by others, mostly by district administrations. But there was uncertainty as to how long this would last. I have been in touch with literally thousands of migrants, and even when they're completely secure and now the reopening has started happening, I keep hearing one thing from them, that ek baar ghar jana hai. They know that many of them will have to go back again, because ghar means places like Odisha and Jharkhand and Bihar do not have that number of jobs for the tens of millions of migrants that are out there. They know that, and they realize that things are beginning to ease now. But they keep saying this one phrase, Saab ek baar ghar jana hai, thode der ke liye. And now that has started because of the special trains and passes being given. People are coming in buses. This is creating another problem. Odisha, for instance, had managed it.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Panda, because you have raised a very, very interesting question or the aspect. While you are sharing your experiences while talking to these migrant workers, where they say that ek bar ghar jana hai. Do you think that is it because that they need a kind of security being associated with their family member during this crisis situation, where they think that they are not getting the responses what they wanted from the higher authorities?
No, no, this is the point I was trying to make. 99% of them have been reached by district authorities with food and rations. Maybe 1% of them have been left out, where we are reaching out through various other efforts. Like I said, my party karyakartas or other NGOs, etc., are reaching out. That insecurity is not there, that they won't have food is not there. They know that going back home is not a permanent solution. So they keep saying is the overall uncertainty that when will the factories reopen? When will they have their jobs? Life as they know it, life as we all have known it, has been upended. So they want that that comfort of seeing the family once. But I see the other side of the problem. I've been having video conferences with industry associations. Many of them are concerned that while the factories were closed, the migrant workers were all there but locked in. Now the factories are beginning to open and they're all going to be going back home. They're concerned how long they'll take to get back. So let me just conclude my initial comments by saying the following. The governance changes have already been happening for several years, where in a crisis like this, if it had happened 10 or 20 years ago, it would have been disastrous because these benefits would not have been directly transmitted to the migrants. They would have had to go through the same leaky governmental systems, and many of them would have fallen through without any safety net. It would have been a real, much bigger crisis. Now, what happens is, this third phase of the lockdown really should be called something else. Instead of being called lockdown 3.0, it should be called opening up 1.0, because this is different from the first and the second phase of the lockdown, with graded relaxation for people to move around, for offices to open with 1/3 staff, etc. But I recognize that there are many other issues. For example, in monitoring many districts that are green, there are a large number of green districts in the country. I come across when small and medium enterprises want to reopen, they're allowed to reopen, but they say that they have uncertainty because maybe the neighboring district is red. If they manufacture whatever they're making, can it be transported? Will it get stuck in transport? Will they get paid in time by their customers? These are the concerns that they have, which are normal. The Prime Minister himself, who took a lead in exhorting people to comply with the lockdown, has also taken a lead now in shifting gears. In his video conference with chief ministers, the last one, about a week or so ago, he is the one who exhorted all the chief ministers that without compromising on public health, they should start pushing the green zones to reopen as quickly as possible, the orange zones to shift to green as quickly as possible, and the red zones to shift to orange as soon as possible. So I would like to say that going forward, there are going to have to be changes. We talk about attracting investment from the companies which are de-risking from China. You must have read the media reports that India is targeting 1,000 such companies, but we will need to change our rules. Many of the industry organizations I've spoken to keep saying that it still takes, there's still a lot of paperwork to get a business started. So these are the changes in policy that we have to make. You're beginning to see some changes in terms of labor law in Madhya Pradesh and in Uttar Pradesh. These will help factories restart quickly. Remember, the roots of the migrant worker problem in India is because such a large part of the economy is informal. The answer to your fundamental question at the beginning of this conference is, what's the way forward? The way forward is India will have to take all the tough steps necessary to increasingly formalize the economy.
I'll come back to this point later, maybe in the second round, because this is the same question I'm going to ask to other speakers as well. But it's very interesting, in the later half, if you can throw some light on your personal experiences while working with the migrant workers within your own, domain in Orissa. And still I feel that though you have given us a kind of a good and rosy picture, but while returning of these migrant workers, which we have got through different media channels and social media, that they were now being requested by, say, for example, one state like Telangana, followed by other states as well, not to leave the state. But these migrant workers, I'm talking about their perception, because they are feeling vulnerable as they are not getting their dues properly. So these are the realities as well. What you are talking, yes, it's also true, but parallelly, these are the pictures what we are getting from different parts of India. So we will come back with all other questions and facets to you maybe later on. Thank you for sharing your ideas and also your experiences while working with the large section of migrant workers. Well, while listening to Mr. Panda, of course, I am very much concerned about Maharashtra, thinking the worst affected country of pandemic nowadays. So my questions will be for Professor Jha, as you belong to Maharashtra specifically, you stay at Mumbai. So I would like to know from you what are the major implications of increasing, incidence of COVID positive cases in the city itself, and also I would like to know from you, the perception among the migrant workers, as well as what are the perceptions prevalent among the other communities within the city. And also I would like to have your opinion on if it is possible to have a kind of long-term policy formulations, keeping definitely the right to dignified life and economic security in mind. So it's over to you for next 10 minutes.
Thanks, Dr. Anusua. It's great to be here in this panel. I would like to begin with the fact that I like the theme of this today's discussion is the appearance of the invisible. To me, I would like to say that if look at Mumbai and Mumbai's context, what gets appeared and when does somebody or some group of people gets appeared in the public spectacle, and when they become turned out from invisible to visible. So what we have seen in the city and the country throughout, that this sudden decision which was made on the 24th has led to a kind of utter chaos where people realized that they had to leave the city. This tells us that how does the poor, how does the laboring migrant relate with the city? What is the relationship with the city, and what was it that made them realize instantly that they had to leave the city? And that's where I bring the case of Mumbai as a case in point for discussion. We all know that Mumbai is a city of contrast. We know that it is one of the world's top 20 richest city. The Mumbai Municipal Corporation is the richest municipal corporation. So that way, in terms of the wealth of the city and the capability of the city, which contributes more than 6% of the GDP of Indian economy, it's also a reality that in this city, 55% people live in slums. And these slums are densely populated slums. And these slums, from Dharavi to Shivajinagar to any slum which you live, which you relate with, you know that how squalid condition they are in. When a government takes a decision without factoring these realities, of people's life, where 55% people, which amounts to roughly 1 crore of city's population, and out of 1 crore, roughly 50 lakh population are interstate migrants. So both interstate and intra-state migrant live in these slums, and they live in many situations. They live into 10 to 10 square feet space. 10 people or 8 people are there. So when some of these decisions are being taken, how is social distancing possible? Why do we have any understanding that these migrants have a minimalist relationship with the city? That means it's only related to their wages. The city has failed to make them their own, and therefore they thought that enough. If it is lockdown, they had to leave. This one has to factor in when we are looking at the city. We also know, as you have rightly said, that out of 56,000 positive cases, more than 11,000 positive cases are from Mumbai. So I think that city which is maximum exposure with the international community, with the affluent community, and the city which also has a stark inequality, but in terms of parallelly living with the affluent classes, this case speaks volumes about where the transmission is coming from. And once it comes in, then is it possible to stop the spread or minimize the spread, where 55% people live in slums and an extremely dense living condition? So that clearly speaks that why is the positive cases are not going to coming down. The second thing which I want to make, that while we are talking today and we are talking about the appearance of the invisible, 16 migrants were killed, were run over by the speedy train today in Maharashtra, in Aurangabad. Now, what does it tell us? It tells us that this class, this migrant workers, were left to fend for themselves, to decide for themselves. Even if the transportation and other things were arranged, they are never assured. One day it is decided, another day it gets cancelled, the third day a particular kind of payment, the fourth day the particular kind of health certificates required. All these things are managed in a particular manner, whereby it says that the dignity of this class is completely compromised. So in that context, I think it is very one has to comprehend that they are being treated as biological minimum rather than having some kind of social citizens.
So in this particular statement, I think you have raised a very critical issue of managing logistics.
Yes.
So how do you relate, this logistical management when informal sector, a huge segment of, migrant workers are interrelated with each other within your city as well as in the state, which is most important while regarded as the state as the receiving state, and also the sending migrant workers to other states as well as abroad.
Yes.
India's abroad.
Yeah.
So your take on that?
I have a very quick point, 3 points as solution or a tentative suggestion and everything. One thing is the transit, the logistics of transit, management of transit, and knowing the emotion, sentiment, and psychology of migrants as a human being thinking, a human being with agency, rather than somebody whose care and welfare only the capitalist and the state can decide on. That means a proper planning. If you know, 21st was Janata Curfew and the 24th night it was announced. We all know who deal with the government and negotiate and align with the government. We know that by 29th, government was sure that in 3-4 days time. So 21st Janta curfew was just a pilot for the lockdown. So we had 3 days to make those arrangements, to send them back, to decongest. If we would have had any idea that what do they think, what do they feel.
So
Therefore, the logic.
in this particular point, Manish, if I reiterate the same question that in my initial questions posed for Mr. Panda, do you think we could have it could be avoided, the undesirable situation, if certain times could be given to these helpless people before the announcement of complete lockdown?
I have absolutely no doubt about it, the capability of Indian government and the maturity of Indian government and the state government, that had they planned it well, they would have executed it perfectly fine. So this is the first thing. The second thing, I think that now when these migrants from Mumbai and other places are, we know it for sure that even though they, and I agree with Mr. Panda, that eventually they will come back to the city. It is the villages or their source states are not capable to hold them on for very long. But it is also a reality that for the time being, they will go. And I would see that at least 3 to 6 months time. That's the time when we have to look at expansion of MG Narega. We have to look at that PDS is universalized. Anybody who needs without ration card, it has to be provided to them. Don't get into the logistics, because we have enough food to make arrangements for that. And we also know that the affluent people in this country is not going to go to the PDS shop to get the foods. So only the needy will go. So therefore, the PDS, the foods, and adding to that, what Mr. Panda has also said, I think at least for the next 3 to 6 months, with PDS food to everybody, supported by a kind of basic transfer of money, because we know that food security doesn't have the entire basket of food. So you have, we require oil, you require other things. So that has to be supported by the basic transfer. And the third thing is nobody, these are the dignified daily wage earners. They are not going to be dependent on the state. They don't like to be like that. So if they have the work opportunity, they will either try to exploit that through MG and RDGA, or they will head back to the city to find other work opportunity. They are not the people who would like to just sit idle and have food or be happy with that. So this is the way I look at this.
Manish, can I ask you the last question
Yes.
in this first round? That how do you analyze the role of, because you are critical about the role of government. Yes, I've got that point from your expression. But how do you analyze the role of civil society in this particular context?
Yeah, I must tell you that the role of civil society has been commendable in the city. Why I'm saying that? One is that for whatever reason, in the last 4 or 5 years, the relationship between the state and civil society has been extremely strained. And there has been a sense of suspicion, there has been a sense of resource cut and other things. As a result, what has happened, civil society's resources, civil society's capabilities had gone down. And people like us who have worked with civil society and the state both very closely were apprehensive that whether the civil society will be able to rise up to the occasion. And I must tell you that you talk to anybody in Bombay, you will realize from municipal corporation to a state government, all of them are dependent on this civil societies, these NGOs who have been working with the community. So even if government wants to get certain things implemented, they know that neither they have the wherewithal, nor they know the community so well, and therefore they have to, and everything it's getting channelized through civil society.
So do you think in these particular context, both center and as well as state government should get in touch with civil societies for the betterment of this situation?
Certainly, and by adding up to the resources, I work very closely with civil society, and I can tell you that they are reaching a tipping point. They are getting exhausted. They know that they cannot sustain it. They know that this is the threshold. And I can tell you that it will break. Any day it will break. So if we really want to sustain what has been the support being provided, then state has to come, or center and the state has to come very heavily in terms of first acknowledging, appreciating, and ensuring that the resources are smoothly being supplied to civil society for then getting it transferred to them.
Okay, I'll stop for the moment here, Manish, because our third speaker is waiting for sharing his views as well. Now I'm going to Mr. Bhowmik. Shubir, you have been working on different facets of migrant workers, and you have been writing, in different domains on that. Your writing titled Long March, it has been largely circulated. So what is your take on the way the migrant labor issue has been handled by the government in COVID situation? Do you think the same question that I raised to Manish, that do you think that logistics of managing migrant labor for the state is a nightmare? When migrant workers, informal economy and logistics are intertwined with each other. This is number one. The second question, do you think that the states had a role to play in this issue? And the third one was involving the military or other forces to get the workers, back on track. What's your take on these particular point? So it's over to you, Shubir, for next 10 minutes.
Okay, right, Anushwa. I've been waiting for a while. It's like a soldier sitting in an ambush looking for a guerrilla to come. Mr. Panda has done a great job by, telling us a lot about what the government did after the lockdown started. I'm not getting to get into disagreements with him. I see his writing. I quite like what he says. He's one of the few sensible people, I think, in the Saffron camp who sort of does a pretty good job about, bringing up his government's point of view. I'm going to raise three very critical questions, which you have not touched so far. And I'm going to refer this to India's previous experiences in military failures or, that kind of situation. We screwed up in Kargil, not because the soldiers were not brave. They really fought hard and they got all the heights of Kargil back to us at the cost of their life. Where was the problem? The top military leadership screwed up in interpreting intelligence. So when Brigadier Surinder Singh sent all the details that here is an attempt by the people to push the LOC, okay, the people in Delhi, army headquarters, the big generals got it all wrong, and then a lot of soldiers had to die to regain this height. Similarly, in this situation, what was the government doing in January and February? Now, I'm going to share some very interesting information. I'm not an academic like Manish, and I'm not a politician like Mr. Panda. I'm a journalist and a bloody good investigative journalist. Now, I can tell you that the government of India has a mission in China, an embassy which works overtime. I can tell you that I know the ambassador, I know the other people there, including our security people. They send at least 3 strong advisories in the month of January that the pandemic has attained dangerous proportions in China and we need to do a couple of things. They actually gave 4 recommendations. The last advisory came on 27 January, that we need to cut off our air travel and all other communication with China, something that Vietnam had done in December. Yeah, so Vietnam, everything is under control. But the point is, there were clear recommendations that we need to cut down travel, but with a window. Why you need a window? Because you need to get all the Indians out of China. A lot of Indians are there today for trade, for students are there studying medicine and so many other stuff. And a lot of Chinese are there in India again for trade and other purposes. So you need to freeze air travel with China, but with a window so that you can get your people out. Yeah, that's number one. There was recommendation of sending people on observation. They didn't use the word quarantine because a lot of people who'd come from China, some of them around the vicinity of Wuhan, may have contracted the virus. So they gave definite recommendation. Now my point is, When you have a mission in China, when you have embassies all over the world, what are they there for? To celebrate 15th August and 26th January?
Shubhi, sorry to interrupt you. Can you please focus on migrant worker? Because
No, wait. Don't interrupt me. My point here is very simple. That number one, did the government take enough cognizance of the reports that came from China, from our own embassy, about the nature and the extent of the crisis? Number one. Number two, 2 months, more than 2 months were completely wasted. Then finally in March, when it dawned on the government that things are getting serious and something has to be done, look at how shabbily the whole thing was done. You get 3 days for Tali Bajao and Thali Bajao and the Janta curfew. You get 4 hours for the lockdown. This is where I come to the migrant workers question. Did the government of India? No, here there is no problem with how the things have been handled on ground. And people like Mr. Panda, who are handling the situation on the ground, have done a good job. What happened to the top planners? Like in Kargil, where India was failed, India failed because of the higher directions of here. Here, the higher directions of politics completely failed India. A, they did not take cognizance of the seriousness of the problem despite reports coming from China. B, when they decided to do it, they implemented the lockdown in as shabby as manner as we have seen demonetization happening or the GST. Now this is becoming the hallmark of this government. When you try to implement something, it's no problem, you know, with the basic sort of frame and design of what you're going to do. It's in the implementation is where you have a top-down approach. People in Delhi decide without any feedback from ground. Now you have all kinds of meetings happening between the Prime Minister and the Chief Ministers, where they're taken into confidence in the period when you finally decided in March to act and tighten your belts. You didn't. And secondly, which is very important, did the higher planners in the Indian government actually realize that India has a huge migrant worker population who are the foot soldiers of India's growth story? What is going to happen to them? How are they going to be moved out? Why there was no lockdown, something that Manisha said. So I'm not doubting India's performance in handling the COVID. Once the lockdown has happened and once finally people have realized it's a serious problem, I'm seriously doubting the entire, wait a minute, let me finish. I'm seriously doubting Indian government's ability to interpret its own intelligence. The intelligence that you get from a foreign country, from your diplomats, from your intelligence people. You went wrong. For 2 months you were busy, you know, with Bandha Pradesh and all that stuff.
We don't have, sorry, we are very sorry, we don't have much time in our hand. So
this happens to the third speaker, yeah? He doesn't get time. You have all the time for the lectures at the beginning.
No.
So you have all the time for the lectures coming from Delhi. No time for the people on ground. Fine.
Listen, I have a watch in front of me and I'm looking at it. So I'll come back to you again. You know, I want to open this domain for question answers so that we can have, you know, more discussion on that.
Can I make one line comment?
Yes.
India forgot, the top Indian leadership forgot that there is something, some entity called a migrant worker. And therefore, they were not part of the planning process between 15th March and the lockdown on 24th March. You woke up after they hit the ground, after they hit the streets.
Yeah.
Then people like Mr. Panda got the job going, but not before that. People had forgotten about them.
Well, Shubhi, let me pose one question during this question answer session to all of you, that what should be the way ahead, in your opinion, for devising a long-term policy initiative for addressing vulnerability of migrant workers in India in post-COVID situation. So I'm posing this question to all the speakers, and I have received lots of you know, question in our chat box and in our question answer box. I am taking a few out of these questions. I'll start with the question posed by Professor Rakhori Chatterjee. He has asked question to Mr. Panda. He said, there seems to be no consistent policy guidance either at the state level or at the central level regarding deeply suffering migrant workers in spite of widespread reporting and discussion in media and civil society. How we reached a state of politics where politicians without responsibility for the people. This is number one. It's a question for Mr. Panda. Then I have a question for Manish from Ambar Kumar Ghosh. And he is asking to you a question: how feasible is it to expect any long-term future policy prescription for these migrant workers that is premised upon that you have raised the right to dignified life and state accountability rather than pity and charity? So we will start our discussion with these questions. I will go through the other questions and collect some questions and get back to you. So Mr. Panda.
Thank you, Anushya. I would like 30 to 45 seconds in the beginning just to clarify a couple of misconceptions and then answer this.
Yes.
Point number one, I did not mean to give an impression of a rosy picture. I just wanted to point out that lots of things have been done, but the road ahead will be arduous. It's going to be tough. Point number two, Professor Jha said something about we know that we can't maintain social distancing in the slums and all that. But the point is, think of what the alternative would have been. We are looking at this only from maybe a social studies point of view, but ask any public health expert and they will tell you that India did the right thing, because moving large numbers of people would have led to a much bigger problem in terms of infections and fatalities. ICMR had projected, you remember there was one epidemiologist who had projected that India would get 500 million infections by the time frame of May, June. We have managed it at about 60,000. So no, I think we did the right thing. There's a public health perspective that is being forgotten in looking at the economic and the sociological aspects. A third thing is, could we have shifted them in those 3 days? No, we couldn't have, because as I said, the public health experts were all against large-scale mass transfer of people, which would have led to all these hundreds of millions of infections. And secondly, every time there has been a sudden relaxation or a sudden movement within the last 6 weeks, you have seen that all social distancing norms are being broken. Otherwise, people have been compliant. So the sudden moves couldn't have happened. But your question, Anushya, is very, very relevant. That is that inconsistency? Answer is yes and no. Union government has actually been consulting everybody right from the beginning. By the way, I want to tell Mr. Bhomik that please look at, there is information out there how Indian government was acting in January. The first confirmation of the virus was on 7th January by the Chinese. The first the crisis management group set up by Government of India was 8th January. And on 17th January, India started screening all passengers from China, and thereafter, in a graded manner, increased all the steps taken. And it consulted all chief ministers. The Prime Minister consulted all chief ministers before that lockdown was announced. And they've had 4 more consultations with the chief ministers. So just to clarify that. But now, the yes and no answer regarding inconsistencies. Union government has given minimum guidelines to all states. For example, what is red, what is orange, what relaxation they can do, they cannot do. The state governments are allowed to make it stricter, not allowed to make it less strict. So there is a consistency on that basis. But beyond that, there are different rules that different states are having. Karnataka was very concerned about the migrant workers moving. They initially gave them a lot of facilities and said, please don't move, but they insisted on moving. They of course have a right to move once the government has allowed them.
Yes.
So now in Odisha, for instance, you must remember, a lot of people came from Surat, and we have faced a second issue. Some people went to the court here in Odisha and got a stay order from the High Court that these relief trains cannot come from Surat, bringing people back, because they should first be all tested. Now, since the rapid test kits are not working, they've been found to be faulty, any test will take 3 days for each of these people. So you must have heard yesterday and day before, many thousands of Odia migrants were stranded in Surat because the trains had to be cancelled due to the court order. So there is a degree of inconsistency because courts are also getting into the picture. Latest on this is today the Supreme Court has overruled the Odisha High Court and said the trains can resume and the migrants can come back to Odisha.
Right.
So, yes, there is a degree of inconsistency, but at the fundamental root of the pyramid, there is not, because the union government has put out very, very specific, strict, clear guidelines and in coordination with the state governments. And most are actually following. There are one or two exceptions. I don't want to go into it. It will become political, but there are one or two exceptions. Most states are cooperating.
Yes. Manish, can you respond to the question?
While responding to the question, one thing I would like to start that some of the responses are very sanitized by Mr. Panda, and I appreciate that. But one thing is that when we look at the future prescription, which is being asked, I think
Manish, in these particular regard, sorry to interrupt you, I have got one question from Abhishek Ranjan, and he is asking the similar question to you on sharing practical solution to solve migrant issue.
I'm coming to that. So when it comes to the practical solution, one thing is very clear, that we have to deal with the trust deficit. Trust deficit is the biggest thing. There is a complete trust deficit with the migrants. The way they are being treated, the way they are being left for themselves, the way they are being bullied, the way they are being repressed. So this is one thing, the trust deficit. How do you do trust deficit? Because people trust doctors and doctors' prescription because there is a trust on the doctor. Now for that, one thing is, as I have said in my presentation, practical number one. Make sure that they are safely sent back for the first point of view, not to get swayed by the builders' lobby to stop migrants' movement. So transit, smooth transit, safe transit is to be ensured. Second, once they reach to their respective villages, they need to be provided with free food under Food Security Act and without ration card issue. Third, their food security is to be supported by a small amount of direct money transfer. The third, as the lockdown reduces or the situation improves, they need to be involved in expanding creative work being generated under Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Once that is done, and as I repeat it, they are not going to stay there for long. So it's a temporary thing a state can do, and state can do is capable of doing it. Now, when they come back, if the market opens up and provides enough opportunity, well and good. Otherwise, the government will have to think of a similar program similar to MG Narega, MG NRDGA, to cities where the government employ the migrant workers in something which the government can take care of, and the people can get employment. So to me, right now, I can think of only thing, and just a quick 30-second thing. One thing long term is the registration of migrants. If you don't ensure that the migrants get registered, that's the huge problem, that the state does not know who they are, how many of them. So register, and I know that registration at destination is difficult. Everybody which is leaving source should be registered. Why no state government and central government is not interested in registering? Because if you don't register, you can deal with the low wages, you can exploit the labor to the maximum. So the workers should get registered. If they get registered, then gradually other things can come.
Well, Mr. Panda, two more questions. Yes, our two boxes are filled with questions, but two more questions for you. One has asked for the specific time frame for dealing with this migrant worker issue. If you have in your mind or in your agenda of your party or the government. And a second, the person, Pratik Mojumdar, he has asked a question to you, that there have been various reports that migrants are not getting the funds and food. What would the government do? So your take on that, very quickly.
Yeah. Specific time frame, there are complications you must keep in mind. One very important aspect that has not been discussed today is that, do you know that people in the villages are resisting the migrants to come back? I'm dealing with Panchayat every day, and they are getting into fights because some of these migrants say this is our home, we can come back. The panchayats are saying that first you have to get a negative certificate because there are no rapid test kits. It's creating problems. There are quarantine facilities, but there are problems. So there are complications on the ground that you can't just ramrod through because you're going to have law and order issues. Number two, most migrants I speak to, as I said, I told you the phrase that they use, ek baar ghar jana hai. So there is an estimate that once they come back, perhaps it will be 4 weeks or 6 weeks. I don't think it will be more than 6 to 8 weeks at the outer limit. That's my guess, because they also need to be getting back into work. Now, these reports that people are not getting some facilities, it's largely not true, because as I said, most of the benefits are now through JAM transfers. But there is, let me explain one angle to it. And this has a relation to what Professor Jha has been saying. Professor Jha has been making some good suggestions, but he may not be aware some of those suggestions have already been implemented. So, for example, registration of migrants. 21 million construction workers got 1,500 rupees each through Jan Dhan transfer is because they are registered. But of course, more need to be registered. He's making a point that without ration cards, people should be given food. Absolutely true in a crisis like this. Union government has actually taken that decision. And most state governments have already taken that decision that April, May, and June, you don't need ration cards. You can just go to the PDS and they will give you, there's a slightly different kit that they are giving you. Some places 5 kilos of rice, some places 10 kilos of rice. But here is the issue that Anusha was just asking. In my monitoring, I find that depending on the state, depending on the district, that part of the problem is not getting thoroughly addressed. In some districts, all poor people without ration cards are getting those ration kits. In some places, they are not getting. The district administration is arranging community kitchens, saying you come and get fed here, but we won't give you rations. So wherever there is that physical distribution, the government's efficiency, local government's efficiency, district and state government's efficiency comes into play. But wherever you can make a direct transfer, like we have done for all these millions of people, that is working better. So just to sum up, time frame, I think outer limit of 2 months. And as far as registration, I agree with Professor Jha. I also agree with him that we should make the ration card Aadhaar linked and usable anywhere in India. So that if you're a migrant worker, you can draw on your benefits no matter where you are.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Panda. And now, Shubir, we have got one question for you. The question says, sir, substantial number of these migrant laborers are working for industries owned by private businessmen. How should the government ensure that these businessmen don't run away from their responsibilities towards these migrant workers? Shubir.
Yeah, I'm not the government, so this might be a question for Mr. Panda, but my own feeling here is that here again, with the private capital, especially of a predatory nature, and crony capitalists who abound in India, would actually like to get out of a situation where they don't have a chance of making profits, but they have to take responsibility. Here again, the government will have to come down very hard. So the government will have to ensure through regulation that nobody is thrown out of job, and that these migrant workers, if they are, their rights have to be protected. And that's where Manisha's suggestion that complete registration is very important, so that it's not just for getting PDS and stuff like that. It's also to ensure that government inspectors, labor inspectors can actually go and check out whether some of these people, especially the construction guys, the road construction, that they don't run away, leaving these people in the lurch. So a protective mechanism has to be devised very strongly. And again, I will insist that you do a great job when you're faced with a crisis. This is India's tradition. Try to understand that you need to be alert to situations. So coming back to Mr. Panda, yes, I know, there were some circulars and stuff like that. Why did this lockdown didn't happen at the time Vietnam did it? Why were 2 months wasted? And why, when it happened, was done in such a shabby manner that there was no window? Suddenly, 4 hours and you have a lockdown and people panic and there's a chaos. So basically here I will insist again that both in terms of monitoring, which is where the government's role is paramount, that these people are not left in the lurch. They are foot soldiers of India's growth story. The last 20 years that India has become the fifth largest economy of the world, from something like 30 where we were in 91, these are the people, yeah? Indian business is not known for great innovation or something like that. You know, Birla's collapsed, not because they didn't design any new thing. You know, this is the same old Ambassador car. So Indian industry is not exactly known for innovation. Yeah, then Maruti Suzuki came in and we had a new set of cars. But what I'm trying to tell you is India's real success, and same with Bangladesh, is that, you know, the labor advantage. So these guys are the foot soldiers of your growth story. They are your asset. Don't look at them as liability. They are your asset. Do everything to protect them.
Yes, thank you so much for raising this critical issue. And, you know, we know that we have not done justice, you know, this short period of time to do this, you know, to deal with this critical issue. But I think we have raised some critical points, and I'm so happy that all of you have agreed to disagree on several issues. But, you know, that's the part of the crux of this scholarly discussion. So, as we don't have you know time in our hand, so we have to close this session, but definitely we will come back with lots of other critical issues and questions in our next episode. This is number 1. So in next episode we will deal with the outbound migration issues, the situation of migrants, migrant workers in abroad, and their stories of coming back to India. So I'm grateful to all our speakers for raising their, you know, for sharing their experiences, raising different issues, critical ideas. So thank you so much. Hope to speak to you again. Hope to walk to you again. Thank you so much on behalf of Observer Research Foundation. And I also thank all the participants. I know that I have not done justice to all of you, those who have raised lots of questions. I have just taken only a few out of this, but definitely our conversation will be going on. Thank you so much.